Rachel and Michael Jennings looked like the perfect couple from the outside. Beautiful home, successful careers, and 10 years of marriage that seemed unbreakable. But behind the filtered photos and shared smiles was a hidden affair, a wealthy older man, and a devastating secret that would turn their love story into a true crime nightmare. What started as betrayal spiraled into a calculated act of revenge, leaving one man infected, a woman behind bars, and a community stunned by how far someone would go to punish the person they once promised to love forever. Michael Jennings was the kind of man most people admired. At 36, he had carved out a stable life for himself in the quiet suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. With a strong jawline, neatly trimmed beard, and a body sculpted from years of personal training, he was both disciplined and deeply committed to the life he was building. He worked as a gym instructor at a well-known local fitness center and took his job seriously. He believed in routine, hard work, and providing for his family. His wife Rachel was the center of that world, or at least that's how it appeared to everyone who knew them. Rachel Jennings, 33, had a very different aura. Where Michael was grounded and predictable, Rachel was spontaneous and full of ambition. She worked in social media marketing, managing influencer campaigns and brand strategies. With her perfectly curated Instagram feed, her style, and her outgoing personality, she often seemed like someone destined for bigger things. Together, they painted the image of a modern-day power couple, attractive, successful, and seemingly in love. Friends and neighbors saw their smiling faces at neighborhood barbecues, their cute couple photos online, and the occasional romantic posts that would gather hundreds of likes. Behind closed doors, however, things weren't as picture-perfect. Michael had always been a man of few words, more comfortable showing love through actions than with compliments or spontaneous gestures. He worked long hours at the gym, sometimes picking up private training clients in the evenings to earn extra money. He was saving for the future. He talked about children, a second property, and maybe even opening his own gym one day. But in focusing on what lay ahead, he didn't see what was slipping away in the present. Rachel, in contrast, felt increasingly lonely. At first, she brushed it off. After all, she knew Michael loved her. He had never strayed, never lied, never made her feel unsafe. But that kind of love didn't keep her warm at night when he came home late, too tired to talk. It didn't make her feel alive the way she wanted. Over time, she began to resent the predictability of her marriage. She missed excitement. She missed being seen. She didn't tell anyone about these feelings, not even her closest friends. To the outside world, she still played the role of the perfect wife. Her social posts were filled with couples' vacations, workout selfies with Michael, and date night snapshots, even if those nights had become few and far between. But inside she was drifting, and she didn't know how to stop. The turning point came during a women's entrepreneur mixer downtown. Rachel went alone, telling Michael it was a work event. There, amid the buzzing crowd of young professionals and aspiring businesswomen, she met Edward Dalton. He was older, around 50, with a sharp suit, silver-streaked hair, and the confidence that came with decades of success. A self-made real estate mogul with luxury properties across the city, Edward was the kind of man who commanded attention, and Rachel gave it to him without hesitation. He asked about her work, complimented her intelligence, and didn't once glance at his phone while she spoke. The attention was intoxicating. He made her feel special in a way she hadn't felt in years. When he offered to take her to dinner, purely to continue the conversation, she accepted. That one dinner turned into weekly lunches, and soon into more. Back home, Michael noticed little things: Rachel's new perfume, the late nights, the extra care with her appearance. When he asked, she'd explain it all away: client meetings, influencer dinners, digital marketing summits. And Michael, trusting as ever, believed her. He had no reason not to. They had been together for almost 10 years. He never imagined she would lie. But Rachel was living a double life, and she was getting better at hiding it. While Michael spent nights drafting gym plans and managing new clients, she was slipping into hotel rooms and expensive restaurants, exploring a world that made her feel desired, powerful, and alive. She still wore her wedding ring. She still smiled in selfies with Michael. But the guilt that once whispered in her ear began to fade. In her mind, this affair wasn't just about cheating. It was about reclaiming the passion she believed had been taken from her. What she didn't realize was that she was also walking down a path that would unravel not just her marriage, but everything in her life. A secret this big never stays hidden forever. And when the truth came out, it would come with a cost no one saw coming. Rachel's world changed the moment Edward Dalton entered it. He was unlike any man she had ever known. At 50, he had the confidence of someone who had seen the world and conquered it. His wealth was obvious but understated: tailored suits, a sleek black Range Rover, a downtown penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't brag or flaunt his success. He didn't need to. It was in the way he carried himself, the way people greeted him with respect, and the way Rachel felt instantly important in his presence. Their relationship began with subtle glances and casual conversations. At the networking event where they met, Edward had approached her with charm and a disarming smile. He asked thoughtful questions about her work, complimented her insight, and made her feel like her opinions mattered. Most men she met treated her like a pretty face behind a screen, someone who worked in internet stuff they didn't understand. But Edward listened. He saw her. At least, that's how it felt. It didn't take long for the meetings to become more frequent. At first, they met in public: trendy cafes, quiet rooftop bars, and upscale restaurants. Rachel told herself it was harmless. She told Michael she was networking, meeting potential clients, expanding her brand. Technically, it wasn't a lie, but her real motive wasn't about business. It was about feeling alive again. Within weeks, their chemistry became too much to ignore. Their first intimate moment happened during a weekend business retreat Edward invited her to. He said he was attending a development conference in Atlanta and asked if she wanted to join him. She hesitated for a moment, then agreed. She told Michael it was a marketing convention. He helped her pack. The hotel suite in Atlanta was luxurious, with champagne on ice and rose petals scattered across the bed. From that night on, the boundaries were gone. Rachel returned to Charlotte with expensive gifts tucked into her suitcase and a secret too big to share. What surprised her most was how easily she slipped back into her normal life. She smiled, cooked dinner, and kissed her husband goodnight, all while carrying memories of another man's hands on her skin. The affair evolved quickly. Edward was generous and persuasive. He made her feel glamorous and untouchable. He booked spa days when she was stressed, bought her designer shoes just because, and offered her connections in the industry that could help her career. Rachel found herself addicted, not just to the physical excitement, but to the lifestyle. It was everything she thought she wanted. It made the routine of home life feel gray and small. She began to feel a strange power in living two lives. She could be the doting wife one day and the mysterious high-class mistress the next. The thrill of the secrecy made her heart race. She started using a second phone Edward gave her, hidden in a purse she never brought home. She opened a separate bank account for his money transfers. Every detail was carefully managed, and the more she got away with it, the less guilt she felt. Rachel justified everything. She told herself that Michael didn't notice her anymore, that he was more in love with the gym than with her. She convinced herself she deserved happiness, even if it came from someone else. And she ignored the small sinking feeling that whispered she was going too far. What she didn't know was that Edward had a reputation. one whispered about in circles of women who had crossed paths with him before. A past lover had once filed a lawsuit against him, claiming he had hidden medical issues and exposed her without warning. The case was quietly settled, and the documents sealed. Rachel never thought to question him. Why would she? He was polished, successful, and careful. She believed she was different, that he would never put her in danger. By the time she began feeling sick, it was already too late. She wrote it off at first. Maybe stress, maybe food poisoning, maybe just exhaustion. But the symptoms worsened. She had night sweats, swollen glands, and a constant feeling of fatigue that even spa days and green smoothies couldn't fix. She went in for blood work, expecting something minor. The phone call from her doctor shattered her illusion. Rachel tested positive for HIV. The floor dropped beneath her. Her first instinct was denial. This had to be a mistake. She demanded another test, then sat in silence for days, waiting for the results. When the second test confirmed it, she was forced to confront what she had been ignoring all along. She was infected, and she wasn't the only one who could be. Rachel stared at the ceiling in silence as the weight of the diagnosis settled in. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't stop replaying the moment the doctor had said the words. "You've tested positive for HIV." It felt like a surreal nightmare, one she couldn't escape even when she opened her eyes. She kept the papers hidden in her handbag, folded tightly, as if burying them deep enough would somehow make the truth disappear. Her thoughts spiraled in every direction. Shame, fear, rage. She blamed herself for letting things go this far. She blamed Edward for not telling her. But most of all, she was terrified of what would happen next, of how her life was about to change, and of what it all meant for Michael. The one person she had vowed to love and protect had no idea that the woman he shared a bed with was now carrying a secret that could destroy him. Rachel confronted Edward in a panic. She didn't even bother hiding her fury. She met him in his car, in a remote parking lot just outside of the city. When she told him, he didn't look surprised. Instead, he sighed and told her calmly that he had been diagnosed years ago. He claimed he was on medication and undetectable, meaning the virus was supposed to be untransmittable. He apologized, said he thought it was safe, and brushed off her accusations. To him, it was a minor inconvenience. To her, it was a death sentence. In that moment, something inside Rachel broke. She wanted to scream, to run, to rewind time. But she did none of those things. Instead, she sat in silence, gritting her teeth, rage boiling just beneath the surface. Her affair had brought her excitement and power, but now it had given her something else entirely, a slow, invisible threat she could never get rid of. For days she avoided Michael. She pretended to be sick, claimed it was a stomach virus, and spent most of her time locked in the guest room. She researched obsessively. She joined anonymous forums, read through CDC guidelines, watched hours of medical videos on how HIV progressed. Every article, every testimony filled her with dread. She thought about coming clean, about telling Michael everything and begging for forgiveness. But the fear of what he would say, what he would do, paralyzed her. Then, something changed. The fear inside her twisted into something darker. Resentment. She began to blame Michael, not directly, but in a way that let her shift responsibility. If he hadn't worked so much, if he had made her feel loved, if he had just seen her, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe she wouldn't have gone looking for someone else. The logic was warped, but it gave her something to cling to. A reason to feel like she wasn't entirely at fault. Over time, Rachel made a chilling decision. She convinced herself that Michael deserved to know, but not through words. She wouldn't tell him. Instead, she would let nature take its course. If she had to live with this, so would he. She resumed intimacy with him, claiming she was feeling better and wanted to reconnect. He welcomed it. He had missed her and never questioned her sudden change. To him, it felt like their marriage was healing. He didn't know that with every kiss, every touch, she was hiding a secret that could cost him his life. Rachel started smiling more, playing the role of the loving wife again. She deleted the messages from Edward and boxed up anything that might raise suspicion. On the surface, life appeared normal. Dinners together, shared laughter, late-night movies. But underneath it all, a silent threat was growing, and Rachel was fully aware of what she was doing. The scariest part was how easy it became. The guilt dulled with time, and in its place grew a cold sense of control. She had made her choice. Whatever happened now, she told herself, was fate. Michael would never know what hit him, at least not until it was far too late. And still, he loved her, completely unaware that the woman he trusted most in the world had already betrayed him in the most irreversible way possible. The clock had started ticking, and Rachel knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Michael Jennings had always trusted his instincts. As a personal trainer, he paid close attention to his body, changes in energy, soreness, nutrition, sleep. So when he began waking up drenched in sweat, felt his muscles aching for no clear reason, and noticed a slow but steady drop in his weight, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At first, he assumed it was burnout. He had been overworking himself after all, taking on new clients and managing back-to-back sessions. But deep down he knew this felt different. The fatigue worsened. He found himself struggling to keep up during workouts that used to be easy. His appetite disappeared. He was constantly cold, even during warm spring days. When he began developing frequent mouth sores and persistent swollen glands, he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. Rachel suggested it might be stress or low iron. She offered to cook healthier meals, bring him supplements, and urged him to get some rest. Her concern seemed genuine. What Michael didn't know was that her concern wasn't for his health. It was fear of what a doctor might uncover. Eventually, Michael went in for a full checkup. His doctor ran a battery of tests, including a standard HIV panel, just to rule everything out. Michael didn't think much of it. He had been in a monogamous relationship with Rachel for years. He didn't do drugs, hadn't had any transfusions or high-risk exposures. He sat in the waiting room flipping through fitness magazines, expecting to be told he was just pushing himself too hard. The call came 2 days later. His doctor's voice was calm, measured, but there was something in the tone that immediately struck Michael. The results were back. Michael had tested positive for HIV. For a full minute, he didn't say anything. He couldn't. The words didn't make sense. He asked if there had been a mistake, if the results had been mixed up. The doctor gently explained that the result was confirmed. Michael sat there in stunned silence, his world shifting under his feet. His first thought was disbelief. His second was Rachel. At home, he confronted her. She cried, covered her mouth in shock, acted as though she was hearing it for the first time. She wept for him, told him they'd figure it out together. Michael, still numb, clung to her comfort. But something didn't feel right. Her reaction was too rehearsed, too measured. In the following days, doubts began to creep into his mind like water through cracks in concrete. Michael's sister, Vanessa, was a nurse. When he told her the news, she hugged him, cried with him, and then began asking questions. Technical questions. She asked when Rachel had last been tested, if they had ever had unprotected contact with anyone else, if Michael had any previous risk factors. He answered all honestly. Then she asked something that caught him off guard. Had Rachel been acting differently lately? Michael paused. The answer was yes. He thought back to the months when Rachel had been distant, the overnight trips, the sudden wardrobe upgrades and new accessories, the odd charges on their shared credit card from hotels he didn't recognize. She had told him it was all work-related. At the time, he hadn't questioned her. But now, with the weight of the diagnosis hanging over him, everything took on a new light. Fueled by suspicion and desperation, Michael started digging. One night when Rachel was asleep, he went through her old purses in the closet. Tucked inside a zipped compartment of a handbag she rarely used anymore was a second phone. It was off, but he charged it and turned it on. What he found was damning. Photos of Rachel and Edward Dalton, messages discussing hotel bookings, weekend plans, affectionate exchanges, voice notes and screenshots of flight itineraries. Michael's heart pounded as he scrolled. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The affair, the trips, the sudden change in Rachel's behavior. But what made his blood run cold was the date on one particular message. Rachel had been diagnosed months before him. There was a message from Edward confirming she had told him about her positive test result. Yet she had never said a word to Michael. The betrayal was more than emotional. It was physical, deliberate, calculated. She had known. She had resumed intimacy with him despite the risks. This wasn't just infidelity. It was something darker. Michael took screenshots, backed up the data, and called his sister. She helped him file a report. From there, things moved quickly. Investigators launched an inquiry, seized both phones, and brought Rachel in for questioning. The truth unraveled like thread from a torn sweater. Rachel had knowingly exposed him to the virus. She didn't deny the affair. She didn't even deny knowing her diagnosis. She claimed she was scared, ashamed, confused. But to the authorities, it didn't matter. The law was clear. Her silence had consequences. Michael sat outside the courtroom weeks later, still trying to process how the woman he loved had nearly destroyed his life. Not with a weapon, but with a secret she never meant to share. The courtroom was colder than Michael had expected. Not just the temperature, but the atmosphere itself. Tense, sterile, unforgiving. He sat stiffly on the bench, his hands folded tightly in his lap, eyes fixed on the woman at the front of the room. Rachel looked small and fragile in her neatly pressed blazer, her once confident posture replaced with a stiffness born from weeks of interrogations and public scrutiny. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her eyes shadowed and empty. This wasn't the woman he remembered from their wedding day, from lazy Sunday mornings, or even from the countless nights he thought he knew who he was lying next to. That version of Rachel was gone. The prosecution laid out the case with grim precision. Rachel Jennings, fully aware of her positive HIV status, had resumed unprotected intimacy with her husband without disclosing her diagnosis. Evidence showed she had been aware for over 2 months before Michael's diagnosis. She had intentionally misled him. Her affair with Edward Dalton was not just immoral, it was dangerous. And now, it was criminal. The courtroom listened in silence as text messages were read aloud, including the one from Edward confirming that Rachel had told him about her status and her decision to keep it from her husband. Michael sat frozen as the words echoed through the room. He knew the truth now, had lived with it for months, but hearing it stated so plainly under oath hit differently. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated harm. Rachel's defense tried to paint a picture of a woman under mental and emotional distress. Her attorney spoke of a breakdown, of confusion and panic, of shame so deep she couldn't bring herself to admit the truth. They called on a psychologist who described her as emotionally unstable, acting from fear rather than malice. But the evidence was impossible to deny, and the prosecution argued that her actions went far beyond a moment of poor judgment. She had made a series of choices, each one more deliberate than the last. Edward Dalton wasn't spared either. After Michael's case went public, several other women came forward. Some had also tested positive. Others had simply kept quiet, too afraid or embarrassed to say anything until now. The investigation into Edward revealed a disturbing pattern of silence and negligence. Though he claimed to be on treatment and under the belief he was undetectable, the court found that he had never informed his partners and had taken no reasonable steps to protect them. He, too, was charged with criminal transmission and reckless endangerment. The media caught wind of the story quickly. Headlines screamed betrayal, deception, and revenge. Rachel's face was plastered on news sites and talk shows. Social media turned her into a villain overnight. She became the subject of viral discussions and debates, with people arguing over whether she was a monster or a mentally broken woman who lost control. Michael, however, stayed silent. He didn't want pity or attention. He only wanted answers and peace. The verdict came after a short deliberation. Rachel was found guilty on all major counts, including attempted manslaughter and intentional transmission of a communicable disease. She was sentenced to 18 years in state prison. Edward received 12 years after pleading guilty to multiple counts related to knowingly exposing his partners without disclosure. Neither showed much emotion as the sentences were read aloud. For Rachel, the silence was perhaps the loudest admission of guilt. After the trial, Michael returned to a house that no longer felt like home. Everything reminded him of what had been lost. The photos on the wall, the wedding album on the shelf, the faint scent of Rachel's perfume on a coat she had left behind. He considered moving, starting fresh somewhere far away, but instead he chose something different. He went public, not with anger, but with purpose. Michael began speaking at local health centers, sharing his story to raise awareness about HIV, the importance of honest communication and relationships, and the devastating impact of betrayal. He launched a small nonprofit dedicated to educating couples about sexually transmitted infections and the legal implications of non-disclosure. He found healing in helping others, in turning his pain into purpose. His health remained stable. With medication and regular treatment, his HIV was well managed. Physically, he was doing well. Emotionally, it would take much longer. The scars Rachel left behind weren't visible, but they were deep. The perfect marriage had been an illusion, shattered by secrets and silence. And though Michael would never understand how the woman he loved could hurt him so deeply, he had accepted one thing. Survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about reclaiming control over his story and using it to ensure no one else had to suffer the way he did. In the end, justice was served. But for Michael, true peace came not from a prison sentence but from the strength to move forward when everything else had fallen apart.